There were expectations for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in 2014. I don't know if they were playoff expectations or for them to be a really good team, but I think people were expecting them to at least be improved under new head coach Lovie Smith, and that really just didn't happen. The floor kind of fell out from under them in 2014. That's not necessarily a bad thing. Sometimes you have to bottom out in order to go back up. And that's kind of what happened with the Buccaneers. You go 2-14, you end up with the number one overall pick. If you're going to be bad, go all the way. Don't half-ass it. That's exactly what the Buccaneers did, and their organization could really reap the benefits long term for doing that. Now, however, with that said, the Buccaneers, to me, were not the worst team in the National Football League last year. This is a team that had multiple games. I think it was like 7 or 8 that they lost by 7 points or less. So while they went 2-14, this is a team that if the breaks would have went a different way, or maybe they would have made one or two other plays, or stopped another team from making one or two other plays, could have easily won 7 or potentially 8 games at least in 2014. So it's not hard to envision that this Buccaneers team could have a nice bounce back season this time around behind Lovie Smith and their rookie quarterback Jameis Winston. Now, last offseason, with Lovie Smith coming into the fold, the team was very proactive in free agency. They threw out a lot of money, and it's so often the case that's not usually a good idea. That means you're trying to compensate for years of poor drafting, and there's no chemistry there. You got to figure out how to fit the square pegs into a round hole, and that, in part, I think, led to the disaster that was the 2014 season for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. There was a lot of money spent with very little return on that investment. So I'm not that surprised to see that team not be that particularly proactive in terms of spending big in free agency. They brought in guys like Major Wright and Isaiah Fry and Chris Conte and Henry Melton and Kasim Green. But in a lot of ways, these are guys that are brought in because they have familiarity with Lovie Smith. They have familiarity with the system. Not all these guys necessarily are guaranteed to make the roster. Not all of them will be big contributors. But they are guys that the Tampa Bay Buccaneers should have been pursuing in free agency. Guys that, again, have a familiarity with the coaching staff or with the head coach, with the system, and guys that could potentially bring at least a little something to the table in terms of system experience. And speaking of the big spending they made last offseason, 2 of the guys they spent money on, Michael Johnson and Josh McCown, were sent packing, and that's probably for the best for all parties involved. Ultimately, this offseason was going to be about the NFL draft for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. With the number 1 overall pick and 2 quarterbacks to choose from, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers were going to be able to draft a potential franchise guy. It was just a matter of which one. I don't think it's surprising to anybody at the end of the day that the Tampa Bay Buccaneers went down the Jameis Winston route. He was the guy that seemed to make the most sense. He's the guy that seemed to be the better fit. He seemed to be the guy that the Tampa Bay Buccaneers wanted, and it ultimately went out that way. So then in the rounds after that in the draft, in particular on the offensive line, they decided to sit there and try to shore up that area by drafting Donovan Smith out of Penn State and Ali Marpet out of Hobart. And the philosophy being, get your young franchise quarterback and then build around him, and you've got to protect him better with your offensive line. So I get what it's saying. And now 2015 really, truly starts a new era for this Tampa Bay Buccaneers organization behind Jameis Winston. When you look at this team's strengths heading into 2015, it's not the worst offensive situation to bring a rookie quarterback in because that wide receiving core is pretty good. In particular, the 2 studs you got on the outside in Vincent Jackson and Mike Evans. I mean, Mike Evans was an absolute stud as a rookie. Vincent Jackson has been really, really good the past couple of years in Tampa Bay. I'd expect more of the same this year. You're bringing in a rookie quarterback. It gives you a lot of margin for error when I'm thrown to this big 6'4" motherfucker and this big 6'5" motherfucker with long arms, and both of them can jump and do things and catch. It's a really good situation, again, to bring in a rookie quarterback, especially one with the talent level of a Jameis Winston. And then you also look at the depth that they have at running back. While they might not have a stud, they have guys in Doug Martin and Bobby Rainey and Charles Sims. They have guys, to me, that can all do something. They can all bring something to the table. And if one goes down, they still have some guys that can contribute in the running game and as pass receivers out of the backfield, which, again, is very beneficial for a young quarterback, a rookie quarterback in this case, like Jameis Winston. And then you go to the defensive side of the ball. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers of the late 90s, early 2000s were built around Warren Sapp, Derek Brooks, and John Lynch. Now you look at this modern Bucs organization. They're built around defensive tackle Jared McCoy and weak side linebacker Levante David. 2 of the best at what they do at their positions in all of the National Football League. While I'm not trying to just compare them per se to 2 Hall of Famers like Sapp and Brooks, you get the point, you get the idea, you get the concept. When you're running the type of system that Lovie Smith is running, guys like McCoy and David are tremendous fits and probably still have yet to play their best football in the National Football League as a result. And if you're starting off with those two on the defensive side of the ball, it can help mask a lot of deficiencies and it can make things a lot easier for you. I do have some concerns, though. I have some concerns about that offensive line. I don't want to sit there and say they're bad, but you're potentially looking at some point in time this year starting both Donovan Smith and Alec Marpet on the offensive line. Smith probably right away, perhaps on the left side. So you're talking about a rookie blindside protector and a rookie guard. Rookies are going to make mistakes at the NFL level. There's no question about that. So I have some concerns about how they'll be able to protect Jameis Winston, how they'll block in the running game. And even if those rookies don't play a lot, then I really have some concerns about that offensive line because you got to protect Jameis. Got to protect Jameis. But on the defensive side of the ball, this Buccaneers organization, somewhat understandably so, the past two drafts has focused on the offensive side of the ball, which really makes sense now considering that their first overall pick this year was a quarterback at Jameis Winston. However, that means they have largely neglected the defensive side of the ball in the past two drafts, and all the coaching in the world eventually can only mask the lack of talent of the Jimmies and Joes on that side of the ball so long. I'm really concerned about whether or not they're going to be able to get any type of outside pass rush from their defensive line. I have concerns about their secondary, in particular the safety position. I really don't see an impact ball hawking type of player there. I have concerns about their linebacking core for somebody that's not named Levante David. I don't think they're all that good in the middle for sure, and they're only adequate maybe at the strong side. So this is a defense that still has a lot of holes that are probably going to have to be addressed in the next couple of drafts. Now, in terms of players to watch this year for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, I could look at somebody like a former first-round pick and muscle hamster, Doug Martin. Here's a guy that in his rookie year was a big force, and then after that, not so much. Now you're looking at him and you're saying, is he going to play like that guy that showed those flashes back in 2012? Is he going to be that versatile all-purpose type of threat that can run between the tackles and be a bit of a playmaker out of the backfield as a pass receiver? Is he going to be that guy? If he can get back to that form and at least somewhat be that guy, or at least be a consistent presence that can give them something in the running game, it's going to help out your young quarterback. And then I look on the defensive side of the ball, a guy like Henry Melton, a former Pro Bowl caliber player, a player that the Bears once thought was important enough to them to be able to give him the franchise tag. Coming off of a knee injury, he didn't play all that well or all that much for the Cowboys last year. Maybe he's a guy playing next to Gerald McCoy, playing under Lovie Smith. A guy like Henry Melton could potentially have a nice bounce-back season. And I look at a guy like Bruce Carter in the middle, potentially, of that cover two defense. He seems to be, from an athletic standpoint, the perfect type of ideal cover two linebacker for Lovie Smith, especially what he wants to do with his version of the Tampa 2 defense. So if he could sit there and be better than Mason Foster was in the middle, which isn't necessarily going to be that terribly difficult, then it provides another element to that Tampa Bay Buccaneers defense. But ultimately, the player to watch on this team, I think, to the surprise of absolutely nobody, is Jameis Winston. Because ultimately, the success or failure of this organization is largely going to hinge upon the success and or failure of Jameis Winston and his development. This is all about Jameis Winston this year. It really is. And he's going to be the guy to watch. But at least for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers standpoint, they've got a reason to watch, and his name is Jameis Winston. Now, looking at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers schedule this year, there are three things that stand out to me. First, I got to go to Week 1 when they host Tennessee. Marcus Mariota versus Jameis Winston. Why the hell would you not want to see that game? It's a chance for one of these guys to start off the career with a win, against the other guy. It's a chance for them to have a showcase to show what they could do at the NFL level, to prove that the fuss was legitimate, that they deserve to be the first two players picked in the 2015 NFL Draft. That's going to be a lot of fun. If you can't get excited for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and Tennessee's Titans squaring off of Week 1, I don't know what the hell was wrong with you, my opinion. But then I look at Weeks 5 and 7. There are two games against less than stellar teams with the bye week sprinkled in. You've got the Buccaneers hosting Jacksonville, and they're traveling to Washington to take on the Redskins. Those are two games that the Tampa Bay Buccaneers can win. Those are two games that the Tampa Bay Buccaneers want to have that kind of worst to first or worst to playoff potential type of turnaround they need to win those games. They need to beat Jacksonville. They need to go on the road and beat the Redskins. These are the types of games they need to win if they want to go from winning 2 games to winning somewhere between 8 to 10 games in 2015. And then I look at one more particular stretch of the season that's late in the year in weeks 13 and 14. They've got 2 straight home games against divisional opponents in Atlanta and New Orleans. Again, if the Tampa Bay Buccaneers want to improve, if the Tampa Bay Buccaneers want to have a winning record this year, they must find a way to beat both of those teams at home. They must win those 2 division games. Because if they can win those 2 division games, it might clear the path for them to at worst finish second in that division. But if they have any visions on doing that, they have to win both of those games. And at that point in time, you're talking about getting into December. Jameis Winston would have had 3/4 of the season to hopefully develop and progress. And maybe the Tampa Bay Buccaneers could close out the season with a strong finish and some momentum built up for 2016 and beyond. Ultimately, I look at this team and I say the Buccaneers were probably overrated by many, myself included, heading into 2014, but they weren't ultimately as bad as their record indicates. This is a team that could possibly win 8 or 9 games. They could. Now, they could sit there and end up only winning 4 or 5 games. That's kind of the range for them. But even if they won 4 or 5 games, it technically would be an improvement, especially if Jameis Winston showed some signs and established that he will be the long-term answer at quarterback for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And at the end of the day, that's what this season is ultimately all about. Yes, it's great if the Tampa Bay Buccaneers win 8, 9, or 10 games. The fan base can be happy and really excited about the future. But if you sat there and that happened, but Jameis sucked or he got hurt and missed most of the season, then what does that really mean? To me, this season is all about Jameis Winston. You take this guy number 1 overall, you need him to be that true, clear-cut franchise quarterback that, frankly, in the 40-year history of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers organization, no offense to Doug Williams, they've never freaking had, ever. The Buccaneers need Jameis Winston to be that star. They need him to be that franchise piece. And his development throughout the entire season of 2015 is the most important storyline for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and frankly, the only thing that really matters.